Hello everyone, and welcome to another Mondays with Michelle video. This week's video continues our discussion on passenger list resources. We'll take a look at the information found on Canada's Form 30A documents and some useful websites for American passenger lists. We'll also discuss the free immigration and passenger list webinars available on FamilySearch. Let's get started. So we talked last Monday on immigration to Canada primarily, and we looked at the Library and Archives Canada website and some of the passenger list information they had available. One thing I didn't show you, but I have mentioned, it was either last week or in previous discussions, for a limited period of time, 1919 to 1924, instead of the usual ship's manifests that listed however many people as individual lines on the page, they had travelers fill out a detailed questionnaire. And I was fortunate in that when my great-grandparents and their children came to Canada, it was within this period of time. They came in 1920. So what they filled out was this Form 30A. And something to bear in mind, the adherence to using Form 30A was not universal. So what you will find is for some ships that should have had their passengers fill out the Form 30A, they might not have. Others decided they would have their passengers fill out Form 30A, and they would also have a regular ship's passenger list. And that's in fact what happened with my great-grandparents and their children. I showed you last week the passenger list for the Metagamma, which looked just like any other passenger list. What I'm going to show you today, though, is the Form 30A that they also filled out. So I have the files saved. So what I'll show you first is the form that my grandfather filled out. And he actually came to Canada a little ahead of the rest of the family. So some of the information on this form that is of interest, it gives the religion. It says the reason they were coming to Canada. So in his case, it was to settle. It says information, can they read, can they write, what languages. This was interesting to me. His passage was paid as part of the soldiers' settlement scheme to encourage soldiers to settle in Canada after World War I. And more importantly, it says he's destined to he's going to his prospective employer at Laidlaw Farm in Edmonton. And it says the name of the railway on which he has ordered a ticket, the CNR. So I know that he came from the Port of Quebec and then took the train to get to Edmonton. It gives his nearest relative back in England. So I've got his father's name and their address and the date. Now, the other piece of information, the back of the form, and let me just bring that up. The back of the form gives a few useful pieces of information. I get his height, his physical description. It says the class of cabin he was in, but it also confirms that, again, he's booked on the CN Rail train to Edmonton. And when you are looking at the Form 30A documents, keep in mind that most of them, they filmed the back of the form first. So when you locate your ancestors entry, you've got to look at the page previous to see the back of that form, not the page following. The page following will be the back of the next person's form. So if we compare his form to his mother's form, this is her form. She came with her husband and the other children a few months later. So my grandfather arrived in April. He and his two brothers came in April, probably to get settled. And then the rest of the family, his parents and his other siblings, all came. So the rest of the family came in late July. They arrived in Quebec August 8th. And what was a surprise to me, thanks to this Form 30A, I hadn't realized that my great-grandparents had converted to Wesleyan Methodist. So this form was really interesting. All of the younger children that were still living at home, they said their religion was Methodist, whereas my grandfather and his older siblings who were not living at home, they listed their religion as Church of England or Protestant. So again, we get some information as to where they are headed. I have the address of her brother. My great-grandmother just had one brother, and so I know that at this point in time, that one brother was living in Bradford in the Leicesterdike area. So there's some really useful information you can find if you are fortunate enough to have ancestors who came to Canada in that narrow window of time where we were looking at these Form 30As. So I wanted to point that out to you. Now, if we turn our attention to US immigration, there is a really useful website, Stephen Morse One-Step Webpages. And what he has done is basically set up a search screen that will allow you to do name searches on a number of different databases. And I would encourage you, if you're going to use this website, to click on this link about this website and how to use it. He basically has links listed for all different ports in the US, and the $ indicates whether you will be accessing databases that you will need to pay to view the details. But the way it works, for example, if I wanted to search Baltimore ship lists, you can search, in this case, by ship name, by arrival date. If we go back and click on Ellis Island passengers, if I want to search for Rentons, and I'll say it's exactly that last name, and then I search, and it's giving me a list of results that I can then click on. So what he has done is, instead of you going directly to the Ellis Island Foundation website, he is giving you basically a one place click on these links. He will search that website and the list of results will bring you into that website directly. So it's another good option when you are looking at US information. It's another good option to add to your list of possibilities. This website I stumbled across. I hadn't ever heard of it before. Genealogy Puzzles Solved. And they have an immigration page. And what I liked about this, it's all kinds of advice on how to find your immigrant ancestors, how to identify their hometown, where you can find different records. So they give a lot of advice. If we just search through, they talk about, for instance, if you have German ancestors, that the US Lutheran Church records will quite often indicate their hometown. And they show you some examples. And they show you what you can find on some of these other websites. So here's that stevemorse.org website we were just looking at. And they talk about naturalization records, border crossing records. And we mentioned last week the St. Albans border crossing records. Even though St. Albans is a place in Vermont, so south of Montreal in the province of Quebec, it was also the place where all border crossing manifests were sent. So what they call the St. Albans lists is not just people crossing over from Quebec into Vermont. It covered border crossings for people going to Detroit, border crossings for people coming from Manitoba into the States, from all over. So don't let the name St. Albans fool you into thinking, well, my ancestors weren't anywhere near there. St. Albans lists is referring to a collection of border crossing records covering a number of different border crossings. So this again is just a really useful website to look at with links to other useful sites. Now, I wanted to talk about what's available on FamilySearch through the courses section. So to access the learning resources we've talked before, you can go in through the sitemap and select Family History Library. So there is useful information under both live classes and webinars, Learning Center, and Roots Tech videos. So let's take a look at live classes and webinars. And I've shown you this list before. This is the list of all 2,000 odd classes. And I'll just scroll to the top here. And you can sort by topic, by language, by title. But what I did is used the Find on Page capability of my browser. So if I go to my browser, to these three little dots, and I select Find on Page, it has popped up this little search window. And I typed in the word immigration, and it says there are 23 entries. And I can use these up-down arrows to basically scroll through. So you can see these are all free courses, webinars that you can view at your convenience. So there's 3 there, Immigration Crossing the Pond. And they've got Collect Records, US Passenger Lists, European Sources. There is a series on Ireland immigration. And if we just scroll through, we've got colonial immigration, immigration and naturalization records, immigration commissioners and agents, Hispanic immigration, Norwegian, US and Canadian border crossings. So my point is, it is worth looking to see what the FamilySearch free webinars offer to give you some more information and help you find other websites or other resources to make it easier to trace your immigrant ancestors. If we look at their help center. I typed in the word immigration, and I found all kinds of blog articles, U.S. Immigration Records Research Guides, Castle Garden, Immigration Before Ellis Island. And I clicked on one of these articles. So here's the one for Ellis Island. So it's giving all kinds of background information. It's giving specific links to record collections within FamilySearch. So again, really useful information. And of course, we have Roots Tech. So I typed in the word immigration, and they do have a seminar in this year's Roots Tech, if I limit it to 2023, 6 popular ports of entry to the United States. I listened to that webinar. It was really great. I hadn't realized quite how many ports there were, other than the 2 or 3 that I'm normally used to researching. And if we look at all of the years for Roots Tech from 2019 to 2023, we've got 76 results for webinars that you can look at for free that could help you find your immigrant ancestors. So I thought that was well worth looking at. Now, I'm also going to give you a link to the National Archives at New York City page, because they do have some information specific to passenger arrival lists. So again, the U.S. National Archives is a good resource for passenger information. And at the top of this page, they have these See Also links. I clicked on the Boston passenger lists one and came to this website. And if you search the database, so I decided to see how many Rentons apparently traveled to Boston for that period of time. No Rentons, but when I searched on Stevenson, there are quite a few Stevensons, my other family line. So again, you get some details and you can view the information that was on the manifest. So that's a helpful website. Something else we talked about last time was the fact that in many cases, it was cheaper for our ancestors to book passage from the UK directly to Canada rather than going UK to the United States. So you may find that there's a record of your ancestors crossing the border, depending on when they came to Canada. So this is a list of the collections within Ancestry. And you notice I'm not logged in right now. So this is just the record of all of the collections of their different manifests and border crossing records. There's quite a few of them. So it is well worth looking to see what you can find. And what I wanted to do, just to finish up here, is to give you a perspective of what we're talking about. So this is the St. Lawrence Seaway. So if you look at the ports, this was the major port of Quebec. We've also got the ports of Halifax, and we've got St. John's. So the Eastern Seaboard US ports, we've got Boston, we've got New York, we've got Philadelphia, So the Canadian ships, if you had an ancestor come into Quebec, although it's hard to see on this map, there would be another boat that they might take to get to Montreal. And from there, they might take some of those steamships that would come down and go through the Great Lakes. And that's how they might have ended up in Detroit. Failing that, they might have taken passage on one of the trains, which is what my ancestors did, and then went across Canada and ended up in Edmonton. So this map gives you a good idea of that St. Albans border crossing. Here is St. Albans in Vermont, this pale gray area. Here's the border between Quebec and the US. This is the city of Montreal. So you can see it is not very far from Montreal to St. Albans, and you notice the railway lines conveniently go right near there. So it's not surprising that so many of our ancestors who landed in Quebec would have ended up going to Vermont or to Connecticut or to Maine, which was basically those states that were bordering this area near where so many of the ships were offloading passengers. And let's see, this is the map I wanted to show. I think this gives a better idea. So here's Quebec. This is your St. Lawrence Seaway. Here's Quebec, Montreal, and as you can see, this is showing the passage of all of those boats. These Great Lakes are all interconnected, and they are huge. So look at the size of the states versus the size of these lakes. The comment was, for some people seeing some of these Great Lakes for the first time, it looks like they are seeing an ocean. That's how vast these lakes are. So if you had ancestors in Detroit, they could very easily have got to Detroit by taking a boat after traveling to Quebec or to Montreal, just taking one of the steamships and getting to Detroit by way of the Great Lakes. And the other website I'm just going to give you a link to for those of you that do have ancestors that traveled by train. I found this website gives a really good indication of how early the railways were running in Canada and the US, and when the Cross Canada Canadian National Railway came into play. So it gives you a better understanding of what were the options for your ancestors who were going west in those early days. I hope you enjoyed this week's video. Don't forget to download the handout. You'll find the link in the video description at the bottom of your screen. You may need to click Show More to see the handout links. Thanks for watching.